everyone, and welcome to the Vance Chavis Coffee Hour, where we bring exciting, engaging people from across the country to Greensboro, North Carolina, through the Greensboro Public Library. We're very excited today to have Ericka Suzanne, who's joining us from California, from Hollywood, California, and our special moderator and host for the day, Karen Ceesay. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Trina Taylor, who'll take away our Vance Chavis Coffee Hour.
Thank you, Beth. I would like now to introduce you to actor, writer, wife, and mom, Karen Ceesay.
Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am so excited to be a part of all of this and in our hopes of making the library cool again. I don't know when it stopped being cool, because the library has always been a place that has been such an important part of our communities, and very excited to be a part of this. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing a wonderful person, an author, and also my Spelman sister, Miss Ericka Suzanne.
Good morning,
All right.
Good afternoon, hello.
Yes, hello, hello. So, Ericka, there's so many things to talk about with you. We have a very long history, but you have a book that is coming out, and I definitely want to start with that, and then we could work backwards. So just tell us a little bit about your book and what is the process, like where it is and status now, and when people can get a hold of it.
Well, and when you said, Karen, about the libraries being cool, like they've always been cool to me. So I am excited to have this opportunity. Even though I haven't visited this library, I'm going to put it on my list of places to go. And then hopefully there's some really good food nearby. But in my family, libraries go back so far that my great-grandfather, who I didn't know, Emmett Scott, he helped found the Carnegie Library for Negroes. When he was working at Tuskegee with Booker T. Washington. And then later on, as a child, my grandmother would take me to the Los Angeles Library downtown, which is like, it looks kind of like a castle. And in Los Angeles, we just don't have a lot of historic landmarkers because, you know, it's a little bit shaky. So that library was always like a really wonderful place to go with my grandmother. And for us who are old enough to remember the Dewey Decimal System, wasn't like interesting to me, but my grandmother would make it like a scavenger hunt because she knew that the numbers didn't necessarily make sense. But the Los Angeles Library is such a beautiful and pinnacle place that even the one near me, I've visited. But one of the things I can't wait to see with yours is the sculptures, because it just adds to the, let me sit and be in my thoughts or be in someone else's story. And even though my book won't be, you know, like Octavia Butler taking you away out of the library, hopefully it will give people a glimpse of what it was like to grow up in the Black Panther Party. My book title is Black Panther Princess. The publisher is Amistad Press for HarperCollins, and it should be out at the end of this year. So end of 2021, the book should be on shelves. I've reserved it on Kindle, even though it makes me nervous to even have that kind of commitment, but that's because I'm a Pisces, so I'm gonna get through it and celebrate the story as it unfolds. As you know, even though you are an actress, but you're also a writer, it's very hard to take a reader into something and hope that they just feel enveloped in it. Like you have to be a great storyteller. One of the things when I watched Ma Rainey's the other night was the storytelling in such a small space was so powerful. And even though we knew it, lots of people think they know the Black Panther Party. So there are lots of books that dissect it from a political, historical, and I'm just telling people this is how I was raised. Now, I left the party when I was almost 8 years old with my mother, but it's the pivotal moments that shape the rest of my life. And then the book will follow from the Black Panther Party to Beverly Hills, which is where we moved, which seemed strange at the time, but you know, my mom is from Philadelphia and women from Philadelphia will do what they will do, Karen. Yeah, so
and Trina.
So we moved from the Black Panther Party to Malibu and then to Beverly Hills. And then I went on to Spelman College, and the book is going to end when I graduate. But obviously, there's such a long history of people saying, what was that like growing up in the party? And oh my gosh, your mom is the only woman in US history to lead a paramilitary organization. We haven't found anyone else. So she's in a club of one. And the idea of this person trying to be a parent at the same time while trying to change the world, like not just Oakland, but the world. And so as an adult, I have a different perspective. But as a child, I was like, why does her bodyguard have to come with us everywhere? So the book will hopefully give people a look at one Black woman's story within this historic and dynamic movement. So when I hear people say Black Panthers were misogynist or sexist, and I wonder why no one ever has a conversation about the woman's role in SNCC or SCLC, I realize that that's a political agenda to try to push a certain narrative about Black Panthers and women. So people can ignore the articles that Huey wrote in 1970 about gay liberation and women's liberation. But maybe through my book, they'll have a sense of what they didn't know. You know, the idea that some things about the Black Panther Party were a family, and they were a family to me. So if you're living with people, bathing with them, going to school with them, eating with them, they're your family.
Well, let's talk, because there's two directions I want to go in. I'm trying to write notes so I don't get totally off. But first and foremost, let's talk about the narrative. Okay. 2020 has just been an incredible year for a multitude of reasons, obvious to everyone. But one of the main things is the narrative and how people are controlling the narrative, how people are getting an opportunity to see how narratives are created. And, you know, it's like when I look back now, there's a documentary talking about the MOVE organization. And I remember growing up in Philly and have that happen. And what my mindset about the MOVE organization was throughout my life, but now as an adult, seeing how things were twisted, how things were sold a certain kind of way, I have to question what I really know about this organization and what negative connotations have been formed. Now that you're an adult, now that we've gone through this, you know, I have a hard time talking about this new healing, as there's a distinct percentage of our population who have been aware of the racial issues in America. And there's another portion of our populace who are just now discovering that these things still exist, and that the narrative has been controlled. How do you see your book fitting into this story of how the narrative will be told from now on of Black people's struggle in America?
Well, that's an interesting question for a couple of reasons, Karen, because I have the other day saw the book from Beverly Tatum, our former Spelman president, trending again in a women's college group that I belong to. Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together? And I haven't read it, even though I feel like I should read everything that a Spelman woman writes. But the fact that her book is trending again, that people are now trying to find out what is it that we've allowed to have us separated. But for me, because of the way I was raised by Marxist Leninists, I look at things in terms of economics. So even people would say race is a social construct. The other day I was looking at drone footage of race in terms of housing. And it was a bunch of drone footage from South Africa where you could see lush greenery, and then across the highway you saw these horrible, not even shanty towns. I mean, the only thing I've seen worse than that were reservations in the United States. But when you look at Oakland, for example, when the Black Panthers said, the city was going to build a freeway and the ramp was going to go over the Black community, which we know means we don't have jobs, we don't have transportation, we don't have access to any of that. And so the Black Panthers explained the physical consequences to that structure. If you build this freeway and it excludes Black people, we will destroy it. So now people say, well, I don't know what to do. What should we do? What should we do? Whereas in the party, they were like, there's a consequence, and that's how people follow evolution. Like, oh, if I put my hand in the fire and it's hot, then I won't do that again. So if there aren't any consequences for the actions that people take now, then there probably isn't going to be that level of evolution. When Huey talked about gay liberation, he wasn't talking about gay pride. He was talking about self-determination. It's great if you want to, dress up. You, Karen, you and I know we both love cosplay, but when we're talking about the politics of being a gay person in America, we're talking about liberation. And so in the Black Panther Party, we talked about women's liberation. We didn't necessarily talk about Black pride. We didn't talk about Black lives. We talked about power to the people, because ours was about self-determination. If you want to have a parade, that's great. But, Huey, we had 10 points to follow, and they were about liberation. They weren't about the costume you were going to wear. But if that helps you discover who you are and you need identity politics to claim who you are, that's fine. But one of the things we need to recognize with this film, I don't know how it's going to go, that's coming out next in a couple months, about Fred Hampton, Black Messiah, is that Fred, the thing that made Fred so dangerous is that he had a coalition. So when you see pictures of Black Panthers standing next to Young Patriot Party and they're wearing a Confederate flag on the back of their jacket, and Fred is the one who's saying to us, we say Black power to Black people, yellow power to yellow people, white power to white people, X power to the people we've left out, all power to the people. We're not talking about pride. So it's a difference between, yay, I'm celebrating being Black, and I want to determine how I live, and not you determine how I live in America because I'm Black. So it's just a different angle. And my book doesn't really address that because I didn't understand those politics until much later. And people find it strange until I say, the Black Panther Party so insulated me from the conditions of why it existed that I would not have known why it existed. Who was going to call me out of my name for being Black or female? It just wasn't going to happen in the Black. So I didn't have any idea. I mean, I knew that people, like, we worked with Cesar Chavez. It was the first time I tried Mexican food. So I knew that there were children working in the fields, and that's why we were boycotting strawberries or lettuce. We always boycotted the good stuff. We never boycotted rhubarb. No offense to rhubarb people, but
Right.
one of the things was about self-determination. So we might examine it in the book in terms of how I saw it. But if someone asked me the 10 points today, I'm ashamed that I could not, rattle them off. I have difficulty remembering the entire Spelman hymn unless I'm with my sister. So
Don't say that.
So I think
Right.
the book will hopefully talk about, because it is very strange to go from the Black Panther Party to Beverly Hills. My mom is still talking to me then about the evils of capitalism while I'm signing up for the YMCA in Beverly Hills. And hers was a safety issue. Like, I know that white people with money will always keep their family safe. So we're going to move to Beverly Hills so you can go to public school. So there's the other dynamic in this book of what a single Black mother would do to still guarantee her child's safety. And especially coming from North Philadelphia, she, I wore thongs, flip-flops. And she was like, but you can't run if you're wearing flip-flops. And I'm like, run from what? I mean, because I was literally raised in a totally different bubble. And the only difference is that once we left the party, I had to spend a couple of years not mentioning where we came from. So if someone asked where we came from, I was supposed to just say Philadelphia, even though I don't sound anything like my mother or my grandmother. I mean, there's a certain accent.
Right. But honestly, I don't have that unless I say water. Right. Water is from,
yeah.
Well, but I never had that because I started acting really young. So I never really had the Philly accent unless I say water. But this was the other place I wanted to go. You have always, whenever you've talked about your experiences within the party, it always was like you were kind of there. And it wasn't really, you were there because your mom was a part of the party, but you weren't really in the party and you were just kind of living your life. Now looking back on these things, what ways have you really specified that this is really, I mean, you mentioned a little bit about how it still determined how you look and how you view things now, of course, but do you feel more a part of that society now and not so much separated from it?
I mean, it's kind of like acting in the fact that I compared normal life to television. So when I saw a Christmas tree in the mall, I said to my mom, oh, I would like a Christmas tree. And she was like, okay. And most people were surprised that I was like 6 or 7. You know, if it came up, then she'd be like, okay. The idea that the tooth fairy wasn't really something, I mean, she would say, I'm going to leave money under your pillow. But I was so excited because I only stayed with my mother on weekends. So whatever moments we were trying to create of normalcy, then I would take my cues from television. She would take her cues from magazines. When we left the Black Panther Party, the first birthday party she had for me, she looked in magazines like, what is a child's, because one birthday she was in Korea, I think when I started walking, she might've been in China when I, you know, my teeth came in. So these moments for us were like, well, how do squares, regular people, do this daily life thing? And part of that is that even when I went into Beverly Hills and even when I came to Spelman, is that I just saw things as, okay, normal people look like this. But I didn't realize that there was anything unusual. It's like when I started Spelman, there weren't any girls with tattoos. The combat boots, people, you know, ask me, are you from New York? Are you gay? Do you worship the devil? Because at that moment in the South, 1980, people really only knew a different world. That was the closest thing they, you know, because that's our school. But then when they saw me, they were like, that is not Whitley. Like, what's, so I was like, oh, okay, so now my mom wants me to be a Black girl. So I'm gonna look at how other girls do it and, okay, I'm not gonna do all that, you know. But I mean, I had a girl stop me in the hall say, why do you wash your hair every day? Did you go to school with white people? And I was like, I did. And she was like, yeah, stop doing that.
Have you seen Big Mouth? Look, I'm like, have you seen Big Mouth? Because Big Mouth has a whole thing about the girl who is finally discovering her Blackness.
But this girl stopped me in the hall. But
right.
Then at the same time, we had a sorority or a sisterhood, I'm sorry, at Spelman Ossett, who they kind of didn't notice me, or they, you know, just thought I dressed strange and the way I talked probably didn't help. But as soon as they found out who my mom was, they had a different reaction. And I was like, oh, so even though you don't really like me, right, now I'm Black. Okay.
So yeah, because when you got to school like freshman year, you know, I knew you were from Beverly Hills. I was not familiar with who your mom was. You know what I mean? I knew you were from Beverly Hills and you didn't click to me for Beverly Hills. I'm like, well, she's got on paratrooper boots. Like what? And her hair is like braids, but not just before like braids was out. Right?
Yeah, and I was only half braiding it because I was like, yeah, I don't want to finish it. I just like, I would make an effort and then I'd be like, my mom is like, I don't understand. I sent her a picture the other day and she said something, I was holding it and she was like, yeah, your cuticles look terrible. And I was like, oh man. But now I remembered that when I got to Spelman, and these are the things, and I think this is why my editor, Patrick Henry Bass, God bless him, because I write like I talk. And I've explained to him that I'm not an author. I'm telling a story. And he's like, that's great because it's an interesting story. But when I came to Spelman and Adrian C. Smith recognized a picture of my mother and was like, why do you have a picture of Elaine Brown on your wall? And I was like, what? Like, I just want to, she told me to come here. You know, I wanted to go to Santa Cruz and just major in, well, my mom said major in beach and dope. You're not going to Santa Cruz to major in beach and dope. So I was like, well, it's right up the road, but I wouldn't live with you, but I could be close enough. Like, I just thought I'd have the best of both worlds. And then she read about Dr. Cole in Essence magazine and was like, oh yeah, no. So it turns out I'm a fixer. You know, all of the influences in my life up until Spelman were white or Black radicals. So I had no knowledge of bougie Black. I mean, I'd seen A Different World, but even when School Days came out like 2 weeks before we started college, or 3 months or something. And in the closing, the last scene in the opening sequence is a picture of my father at George Jackson's funeral. And my father had died a month before the movie came out. So when I saw it, all I thought was, oh, I'm supposed to go to Spelman. And whatever it is, I will do that. But the thing about me, Karen, is that the book is the way I talk. So you might have to, I mean, the editor is trying to help me rein this in. but I have a tendency to go on a tangent, and my
No.
ex will follow me, but he'll be like, and then we'll come back to it. But you have to stay with it, you know? So like, I'll talk about Rosa Parks, but then I'll be like, and then last month I got the Rosa Parks Barbie, and go all into my Barbie collection, which is another thing that people were like, Black Panther, Barbie.
Barbie.
Yes. I have
What
Wonder
was the,
Woman, Batgirl.
yeah, well, everyone had Wonder Woman, and woohoo, can't wait to watch Wonder Woman 84. Anyway, but what was like the culture shock for you? Because what were you, like 8? Because there
Yeah.
had to be certain moments where it's the culture shock of living an extreme existence, but then there's just the typical growing pains of being a gal in America, you know? So what were some of those shocks of being in a completely different environment, and not just white Black experiences? You know what I mean? It's got to be more than just the
Well, for us,
politically.
it was also, I mean, it was a lot of the beginning when we first left, it was a lot of politics. So when my mom said, okay, we're not coming back, we're going to go to Los Angeles, but we're not coming back. So I didn't really understand what that meant. Like, you'll never see these people again, the people that you live with, because I live with my mom on weekends, which I loved. I mean, my mother shared an apartment with Ericka Huggins, who I'm named for. And they each had a room, and then Erica's daughter, Mai, and I shared a room when we were there on the weekends. But otherwise, we lived in the dormitory. So I went from living with 20 kids to just my mom in 2 days. And I thought, well, as long as I'm whatever makes things easier for her, that'll be good. Like, if I'm missing them, or I feel any kind of way, I'm not going to deal with that. I'll just push that aside. And, you know, I'm excited because everything I based how I wanted to live was based on pop culture. And now I was like, my mom and I will be like the courtship of Eddie's father. Like,
People, let me
now,
tell you about my best friend,
yeah,
right?
now it's going to be the two of us, and we did hang out. But, you know, that first couple of years, you know, she fought with everyone. Every time we went somewhere, it was going to turn into an argument. Or if
Billy in the
she
house.
or if she was concerned that they recognized her. So the first couple of years were just be quiet, you know. Luckily, my godmother, Suzanne, was just, I mean, I didn't know all the things she did until I was much older. But when we left the party, Suzanne is the one who gave my mom the job at Motown. Suzanne
DePass.
DePass gave us an apartment in Malibu, gave us an apartment to live in Malibu, and paid for my first year of school when I started the lycée. So, but I also had never met, I didn't know my mom had friends. So when I met Suzanne, she was my mother's first friend that I'd ever met. I didn't even know Black Panthers had friends. You know what I mean? Like, they were always together, always working. We saw our grandparents, and you'll see in the book that I spent summer with my grandmother. So I have no idea, but I always knew I would come back. So I'd see the kids in the dorm. So to leave in the middle, you know, the end of October, when you're a child and you're like, even though we didn't necessarily celebrate holidays in the party, we saw things on television. So we had Halloween. We didn't really have Christmas, but we had Christmas trees in our homes. It's, you know, it's just that we weren't going to have like a Christmas pageant at school. But we didn't.
Well, let me.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go on. Finish with.
No, I'm saying, but and you'll see in the book that we saw each other every day. So that transition was the hardest. Like, if you see these kids behind me, you know, this is me. No, that's me. We saw each other every day. And so to go from that immediate change, I just kind of was like, don't deal with it. We're going to be the courtship of Eddie's father. It's going to be great.
Do you have now, because how old was your mom when you all left the party?
I think she was 35.
Okay. So now,
32.
as a older than 35-year-old woman, looking back on that experience with adult eyes, how do you qualify and quantify those years for your mom? Like, how do you try to look through it through what she was going through, or you know, how do you rectify all of that now?
I absolutely do, because otherwise I feel really not angry, but like, there was a time where I definitely didn't trust any white people, but that is that comes from the family history. My great grandmother, who looked more like Beth, could not stand white people. Her father was a white man and her mother was the Black woman who worked in his home. You take from that what you will. So, and then when we left the party, I probably spent a year hating Black people because I felt like my mother gave up everything. She did everything for Black people. She didn't spend time with her child. She didn't have a husband, the things that I thought of as normal. She didn't do any of that. And Black people just want to live the Ebony magazine life. The idea that Black liberation to them means I have access to join this yacht club that I couldn't join 20 years ago. And that's a celebration of Black free liberation. You know what I mean? So I was probably like, yeah, I don't like anybody. I don't trust you. I don't trust that person. And especially because, and you'll see in certain parts of the book where I, like in 7th grade, when I was put out of class for sitting during the Pledge of Allegiance, it really didn't have anything to do with the Black Panther Party, but it did. It's not like people talk to me. The Pledge of Allegiance obviously never came up in the Black Panther Party. So it's not like someone would say, we're not going to do that. It just didn't come up. But then I saw a news story on 60 Minutes about a young kid in, I want to say it could have been Pennsylvania, who decided not to say it. And this was 1982. So public schools were grappling with, you can't make kids say it. So I wasn't going to sit there or stand up and, be my family. I just sat quietly. The teacher, she went off. I burst out in tears. It's going to be a funny story only because when I talk about it and you know a little history about my mother or people from Philadelphia or Black women from Philadelphia, when I called her and I was like, this teacher was so mean to me. I didn't say the Pledge of Allegiance. She screamed at me and told me to get out. She put me out of class. And my mom was like, she said, Erika, I almost broke the phone. She was at work like, okay. And this is, when she still smoked. So my mom, when she smoked, when she was mad, would be like this much ash on the cigarette, like, oh. So she did go talk to the teacher, and I did not ever see that teacher again after that day. But then I also said to my history teacher in 7th grade, something about Australia being started by a penal colony of terrorists. And the teacher was like, why would you say that? It was started by pioneers. And I was like, no, people already lived there. Well, and then, so she wrote something in the PTA thing, telling my mother about what I said. And my mom was like, good. But the teacher was taken aback, like, we're trying to teach these kids bold-faced lies and your daughter is not going along with the program. So those parts will be interesting to a certain age group, just like the college years will, but all of it does have the underlying thread of how I was raised. People are surprised when they find out we weren't allowed to have toy guns or toy knives because the gun is a tool and the knife is a tool. We weren't, even though they use the NGA word with each other all the time, we weren't allowed to use any form of the N word. We call each other comrade, brother, and sister. But the funny thing to me now is one of my comrade moms passed away a couple of months ago. And when we had a virtual memorial for her, all of the Panthers, they still call each other comrade, the men and the women. So as they were, maybe there were 30 people on this call and 10 of us might've been children, but the Panthers still call each other comrade. And I thought that was so beautiful. Like, okay, so maybe it sounds strange to outsiders, but we're still us.
And it's what I am looking forward to in your book is that, I've gotten different stories. The stories that you tell are always hilarious because they're so matter of fact. My favorite one being, well, that was that time where Ike and Tina Turner were performing for the Panthers. And then Ike, he was on coke at the time. So, he wanted his money then. So a fight broke out. My mom was fighting one of the Ikeettes. And I'm like, right?
It's one of my favorite stories too, Karen, though. But but now when I try to see it through someone else's eyes, like, you were 3? Like, yeah, it looked like the Three Stooges to me, but it was a riot. Huey was like, look, Ike, you can treat Tina any way you want, but if you don't go out here and finish this performance that we're paying you for to fundraise in Oakland, and Ike didn't realize you're in Oakland, man.
Right, it's not the right place.
All the security in the theater. So, watching my mom wrench up her dress and take off her candies.
Philly in the house.
And she wore Austin perfume at the time. So I was really like, I just thought she was like Lola Falana. And I mean, just all of the glamorous, you know, if Diana Ross had been a gun moll with a political agenda, like I thought my mom was so glamorous as she leapt on stage and chased an Ike down and yanked off the girl's hair. And I was like, go mom.
Right. So,
my grandmother
okay.
sat there, Philly. My grandmother sat,
Right.
people are kicking each other, throwing, beating each other with guitars. Cymbals are flying in the air. And my grandmother's sitting there like, are we gonna make dinner? Because we still had dinner reservations at the lamppost. And I was like, well, it's the party's restaurant. So yeah, but my grandmother was not impressed by the fight at all.
At all, yeah.
Not moved a bit.
One of the things I think is fabulous about your book coming out after hearing all of these stories, and even though you've led an extreme life, there's still so much that so many of us can relate to as far as feeling like you're not exactly a part of each world that you're supposed to be a part of automatically, that you don't quite fit in, that you know, you're trying to find a place for yourself in the shadow of your parents. You know, my dad was one of those men in Philly that everyone knew wherever you went. He was a, you know, a union leader. My mom did a lot of things in the city. So there's still places I can go and people still know my dad, or still know who my mom ran into somebody she knew from kindergarten or whatever in Atlanta, and she's from Boston. But I say all this to say what? There is this place where as adults, once we kind of come into our own, where we have find out these different places, these different parts of ourselves, and make a whole person. And I find that kind of interesting with your Barbie collection, because it's like Barbie has been like the symbol of white America with, you know, blonde and incredibly interesting measurements. But you have really found a way to make that the Black experience, and talk a little bit about
Well,
what the Barbies mean, right?
But two things. It's funny that you say that, because one of the things that my editor said to me the other day was, because I was talking about pop culture, you know, the way I like or thought of Courtship of Eddie's Father, or my favorite show when I lived in the dorms in Oakland was 8 is Enough, because they had a house full of people. And it reminded me, you know, the woman that took care of us in the party in our dorms, her name was Patsy. She was a large, half Black, half Japanese woman who probably was 23, taking care of 20 kids every day. We would get off that school bus and she would have our dinner, do our hair, make sure we did our homework, and bathe us. I mean, if I see her right now, I'll probably just jump for joy and be like, I'm sorry. But she would get us ready. So 8 is Enough. And when she would braid our hair, I was like, I want to go last because I want to watch 8 is Enough. But one of the things my editor said as I was talking about pop culture references in relation to the party, like when I said to him, yeah, it was like the activist Addams Family or the militant Munsters. Like I was Maryland, like, okay, wait, so we get to go to this amusement park? And Donna would be like, yeah, but you can't touch anything red, white, or blue. And the amusement park is called Great America. She'd be like, yeah, they're not paying their workers. These are some capitalist dogs. Have a good time, kids. I'm like, what?
What?
Okay. But he said to me, my editor said, you're the Black girl in the John Hughes film he never shows. And I was like, that might be true, because soaked in white popular culture, but then also maintaining an identity that is rooted in being Black, but also in being Black and American. And I'm sure you know this, Karen, being married to a different nationality.
A different Black.
Yeah, because when people are like, well, what nationality are you? And I say American, but ethnicity is a different thing. But Africans and Black Americans, or like my mom, when she lived with a Frenchman, who Pierre will obviously be mentioned in the book, but she lived my last 3 years in college in France with a French industrialist white man who I loved. I'd never seen anyone love my mother, except for maybe Hewitt, but I didn't understand what that was. But Pierre had this whole obsession with Black American culture. Gladys Knight was the best thing, but like America, white America, he was like, yeah, it's just okay. So that will be an interesting dynamic, because people who thought they knew who she should be would be like, Pierre, you moved to France. And I'm like, you know what? He paid for the last 2 years of my school. He loved my mother. He was kind. He was funny. He loved Spelman entirely too much, because he thought everybody was Gladys Knight or an artist. You know, and he's like, oh, she's a beautiful painter. I'm like, no, this is not Themyscira, okay, man. But that dynamic, even of Pierre and his reading about the Black Panther Party, he said to my mother, it's so wonderful that you would love your people so much to give everything, because he was wealthy, white, French. He had no relationship to why this would exist. And even he got the drill when he'd see people respond to her. But when you said that about being in Philly, I love my mother and I'm really proud, but there's a reason I don't live in Oakland, because we apparently look very much alike. And I love every time I go there that eventually someone will say, I took a sickle cell test because of the Panthers. I had clothing. You got my boy out of jail. You found the cop who set him up. Like, it's always a beautiful story, but it would be a lot of pressure. Like, I give mad respect to the King children for staying in Atlanta, because I can't imagine the expectations even still. You know, when one of them went to Trump Tower, it was kind of heartbreaking to me, because I, you know, had a brief and wonderful encounter with Coretta Scott King, and I thought about what she would say. But then when I see certain things, I know that people will attach who my parents are, and this book will make that even larger to what I say. So if someone says, oh, will you do this film to a little snippet to endorse Warnock? And I thought, well, that's such a great idea. But then I thought Warnock has a interesting opponent, and who my parents are could be used against him. So then I was like, I'm just going to send some money in. But since I don't live in Georgia anymore, that's the only. But I realized after Beyonce at the Super Bowl, how long a legacy can impact. Because when the police were like, we're going to boycott Beyonce because she had her dancers in berets. Well, first of all, they were in San Francisco and it was the 50th anniversary of the party. That was, to us, we thought, oh, this makes sense. But when the police said they were boycotting her, I was like, you know, the Black Panther Party, the school closed in 1981. And so for you to still have this kind of reaction, or the fact that the film Black Panther wasn't made earlier, which I'm glad, with Wesley Snipes, because they were afraid it would be associated with the Black Panther Party. And now Ryan Coogler, who is from Oakland, knows that that isn't. So that was a whole trip for me too, Karen. Like, wait, people didn't spit when they said Black Panther? Interesting. Oh, they're going to actually find out about the truth about what the Panthers did and why Hoover was really afraid. But then I also look at pop culture and I say, this book has to have a place that tells people not the truth, but my truth. I saw the Kristen Stewart movie about Gene Seberg, and my father is not mentioned in it once, even though he's the name in the Los Angeles Times associated with her that led to the scandal saying she was impregnated by a Black Panther. So Kristen Stewart looked great in these period pieces, but you didn't know anything about why Gene Seberg had an association with the party. They just made it seem like this beautiful actress went crazy. And then they made the FBI look like the good guy. It was just weird. So I'm gonna be hopeful. I
had a hard time trying to watch that. I did.
It looked great, but I was like, you didn't say Masai, Hewitt. They said Black Panther twice. And then they're like, we're spying on her for various reasons. And because she was close to my mother, and I know that they used my father to drive her to end her career. It's one of the things that when he was alive, that he never talked about. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of, no matter how old I get, that will still come up. The fact that these movies are being made now, I really hope that they're respectful to Fred Hampton. But I also know that my book could be used to judge Panthers. Like, how could she raise this little frivolous daughter of Beverly Hills, and she's riding a skateboard and wearing Vans when, you know, she's supposed to be out there putting together an AK-47. I don't know, but everybody's expectation, the good thing is that everybody will find something to be disappointed about in the book. And that I'll just be like, great. Oh, you thought it was too Black? You didn't think it was Black enough? Great. You're both right. So
this is because we're coming to we got a couple more minutes left and everything. I do want to get a little bit more out of what do you really want people to come out of this with? Like what, you jokingly say there's lots of things for people to be disappointed in or whatever, but ultimately you want people to find connections with you, with Erika the girl, Erika the teenager, Erika the woman, outside of the party and how you were affected by the party. What different Erikas are people going to connect with?
Well, I mean, there's a weird thing a therapist told me, not weird, but it was just so simple and easy to understand about the difference between being aggressive and assertive. And I was raised by people who were both aggressive and assertive, and then never had that ability within myself. So it's not, I don't blame myself for being raped, but it means that when it happened at 15, I didn't have the words to say, I was raped. I wanted to take this person to court. This was wrong. I didn't even tell my mother. So then when drugs became an easy thing, it's Beverly Hills in the 80s. I mean, I hate to say it, but some cliches are just, we had a bathroom attendant at my prom to make sure that girls weren't using cocaine in the bathroom or, going to at a stall to use drugs. And that's the other thing is I have to say this since I'm speaking to a library, this book is probably not for anyone under 16 years old.
Which means they're all going to go get it. Please let me know. Right?
I don't
Trina,
think
your daughter's getting a copy, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I don't think that it's for under 16. But we'll see. But it is about, becoming assertive and not necessarily being afraid of doing something wrong. And I'll leave you with this. If we have one more question, that's great. But for me, it's if you're told your whole life that you were born for revolution, what do you do with your life when the revolution never comes?
Wow. See, that's it right there. Way to throw in the 80s drug references right at the end, right? Way to just kind
if you're
of
ever
throw
on
that
YouTube,
in.
if you're ever on YouTube and you put in Beverly Hills High Prom 1988, you'll see a quick flash of me going,
oh, okay. So getting the powder out. Okay. But definitely, this has been an awesome talk. Again, I'm so excited to be a part of this with Vance Chavis Library. And Greensboro, of course, has its history of HBCUs. We have definitely talked about Spelman, and Spelman was the first place I went to where I found Black women, all kinds of different type of Black women, and all the people
Bennett,
that told me
those
that
are our sisters. Our sisters
right,
at Bennett. There's
right.
only two in this country and probably the world, but two in this country, and that's Spelman and Bennett. So the fact that you got, I mean, it's a great reason for me to try to get there when the book comes out.
Definitely. So plug for HBCUs, plug for libraries. Definitely, we appreciate this time that you've spent with us today. Once again, I'm Karen Ceesay, Ericka Suzanne. We've got Trina Taylor and Beth Sheffield also. Any parting words from either of you ladies?
Well, Trina and Beth, I want to thank you both for having me. I thank Karen, but we're already Spelman sisters, so she should invite me. No, I'm kidding. But thank you guys so much for having me on, and I hope that when the book comes out, that I can be there in person. I would love to learn more about that sculpture. Also, I just love the atrium. I'm superficial too. I think libraries should be like, beautiful exhibits for the books.
Well, thank you. And yeah, we have lots of art at all of our locations at the Greensboro Public Library. And, we're really a city committed to change. We, we're the site of the first sit-in on February 1st, 1960 at the Woolworth Lunch Counter. It's the home to Bennett College as well as to NC State University, plus the other colleges and universities here. A strong Quaker tradition in our community, building consensus. But we also have the history of a Death to the Klan rally in which 4 members of the Communist Party were gunned down here in Greensboro too. So, there's a lot of intersecting history, Erika, with your life and Greensboro. So, thank you for sharing today, and we look forward to continuing this story. And you're absolutely you will be here for your book
Black Panther Princess is going to be at your
Yes.
library, and I will be there.
Yes, yes, yes. We'll bring that into intention. So
2021.
Yes, yeah. Trina, do you have anything to say about Vance Chavis? Yeah, tell us some of the cool stuff there at the branch.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Vance Chavis Branch Library is well known for its extensive African American collection. So, Erika, when you do come here to Greensboro, I would love for you to stop by here and have a look at what we have, both fiction and nonfiction.
Oh, I love it. Okay.
Another fact about Vance Chavis Branch is that, you mentioned that I think it was your grandfather that helped start the Carnegie Negro Library.
Mhm.
Well, actually, so Vance Chavis's beginnings were on Bennett College as the Carnegie Negro Library. There is a whole
I did not know
history.
that.
We could talk for another hour about how that branch came to be, but Martha Sebastian, the first librarian at Vance Chavis or at the Carnegie Free Library, she really believed that libraries were the root and fruit of the community. She would open up the building for meetings and for people all the time. It's really, it's part of that history and tradition, and you're kind of bringing that full circle.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I did not know that about the Carnegie and Vance. I mean, that connection is just fantastic.
Yes, yeah. Well, thank you.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We are signing off now. Please join us. We have a series of interviews, Coffee With. So with Vance Chavis, it's actually just water.
Well, I'll see you ladies at the library.
All right. Thank you so much. Signing off now.